Hi, my name is Danny Garrett, and I'm here today with Ryan Lothrop and Justin Spinelli, and we're fisheries biologists with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And today we're going to show you a little bit more about how to catch coho salmon. For those of you that have small craft or just getting into salmon fishing, being out here in the saltwater can be pretty intimidating. But as you'll see today in a 16-foot John boat, not more than a quarter mile from the Shilshole Marina boat launch, we're going to get into some nice-sized coho salmon and show you a little bit more about how to catch these fish.
We're also going to discuss some basic regulations, how to handle and release fish, and also some tools we use to adaptively manage this fishery.
So hop in the boat with us and let's teach you a little bit more about coho salmon. There's three things to keep in mind when you're out here trolling for salmon. You're trolling speed, direction, and depth. For speed, it's going to vary by species. For coho salmon, it's 3 to 3.5 miles per hour in general. For direction, most people like to go with the tide. That's with the current because the fish are oriented with their nose facing upstream and they're going to see the bait coming at them. Third is your depth. For coho in September, a general rule of thumb is 35 to 60 feet right at dawn, and then at 8:30 start dropping your baits down 10 feet for every hour. Again, this is just a general rule of thumb, and ultimately your personal experience on the water is going to help you catch more fish.
You good? Well, cut a shaker. You're going to run into them out there, so you need to check your baits every now and then. And just make sure you keep them overboard, because oftentimes there's a minimum size limit. And we'll let this guy go. All right, well, we got one on. Feels like I'm pulling 50 pounds in, but we'll see what we get.
Watch out for sea lions.
Thanks. That's running. We just landed this nice fish here, and the first thing you're going to do, if you're unsure of what it is you're going to not bring it in the boat. You're going to first ID what species. In this case, it's a coho. And then secondly, you're going to see if it's a hatchery or a wild fish. In this case, you can see this is where the adipose fin would be, and it's missing, which is evidence of a healed scar. In that case, if the plan was to keep this fish, we could, or release it. You can do that since the fish has not been brought in the boat yet.
So when you get out here on Puget Sound as a beginner angler, you're going to be a little mystified about where to start salmon fishing. Pay attention to the other boats. They're always going to congregate in really productive areas. A lot of times you're going to use your depth finder, you're going to be able to spot bait fish. The salmon are going to be underneath those bait balls feeding on herring and other bait fish, and you need to locate those on your depth finder to locate productive areas. Another thing to pay attention to is rip currents that will form off of points and even out in the middle of the channel where two current seams are coming together, which will concentrate zooplankton and correspondingly concentrate bait fish, which salmon feed on. So there's a couple things to look for which are going to up your chances of finding salmon. Okay, Justin's hooked up on a nice fish here. A lot of times it's a good idea to help your buddy out and reel in the downrigger because they can get tangled up alongside of the boat. Okay, so we're bringing the fish alongside of the boat. You can see they really like to go berserk at the boat, so it's important you keep the boat in motion and slowly guide them to the side of the boat where you want to land the fish. We're turning the boat to the left and trying to land the fish on the left side of the boat. Remember, keep the fish in the water until you've determined what species it is and whether it's a hatchery fish or not. You can see the hook popped right out because we always pinch our barbs. Always remember to pinch your barbs. So let me show you how we're setting our gear today. You're going to have the boat in motion going your normal trolling speed around 3 miles an hour when you set this gear. You're going to let the bait back just 10 to 20 feet is all. We're fishing pretty deep, especially in the middle of the day at this point, upwards of 100, 125 feet. So it doesn't have to be very far behind the clip. It's also going to help you when a fish hits, you're not going to have as much slack in your line. That's going to allow your rod to recoil and kind of help set the hook on the fish when he takes the bait. Pinch the line in the downrigger clip fairly deep so that you don't accidentally pop it when you're letting it down. And then just let it down to the desired depth. And once you get to where you want to fish, go ahead and tighten down the downrigger and engage your reel. And then reel up all that extra slack and make sure you're nice and tight to the clip. That way there's as little of slack as possible, and when that fish takes the bait, it's going to pop the clip and load up your rod, and you're going to have a much better chance of keeping that fish on. Now, we've mentioned a couple different things about trolling depth, speed, and direction, and also going with the tidal current when you're trolling. One other thing to mention is to make turns occasionally. You want to zigzag your way in the direction you're heading. Every time you turn, that outside lure is getting pulled a little bit faster, and that inside lure on the inside turn is slowing down a little bit. That slight change in speed and also the action of that flasher going through the water is oftentimes what entices a salmon to strike. Okay, we've hooked in a couple nice fish here. We actually got a double hookup, which is not uncommon because these fish are usually in large groups. You want to keep the boat moving to keep all the slack out of the line. Sometimes they're going to run at the boat. You want to keep the boat in gear unless you got a really big fish on, and then slowly work them to the boat. Again, you might be tempted to pop the motor into neutral and get these fish in a little quicker, but if you just slowly get them, guide them to the boat, you got a much better chance of getting them in the net. Thank you. So we got a wild fish here. Ryan's going to show you the adipose fin, and he's going to carefully release that fish. Again, check your regulations. Every marine area is a little different. Some areas you can keep wild fish, other areas you cannot keep wild fish. Once you get the flasher board out of the water, I try to keep it out of the water. The fish will use that flasher board as leverage when it's in the water. So try to keep the flasher board above the water and keep pressure on the fish. Another thing I like to do is turn the boat towards the fish or the side of the boat that you want to net it on, and that kind of helps you to get them, direct them into the net. This is a nicer fish here. Coming in now.
Nice fish.
Again, we're going to keep this fish over the side of the boat. Keep them in the water. And the hook just falls out. That's the trick to using barbless hooks. Remember, always pinch your barbs in these marine areas. It's going to help you to release these wild fish a lot easier when you get them up the side of the boat. So you get the fish alongside of the boat, keep them in the water. We can see, looking at the tail, he's got spots on the upper lobe, but not on the whole tail. And he's not completely black on the gums like a king would be. We look and we see he's unclipped, so this is definitely a wild fish. And make sure to check your regulations whether you are going to retain these fish or not. Every marine area is different. You know, as you've seen today, we've caught most of our fish later in the day as the sun's high in the sky. A lot of times these coho will continue to bite throughout the day, so don't get discouraged if the early morning bite isn't productive. Lower your baits down as the sun gets higher in the sky, sometimes upwards of 100 feet, until you find those coho. They're going to bite throughout the day, so stick with it.
So when you go fishing, be sure you have a current fishing license, you know the regulations for the area you're fishing in, and any emergency rules in place. This information can be found on the Washington Department Fish and Wildlife webpage and the hotline phone number.
We sure hope you've enjoyed this short introduction to coho salmon fishing. Remember, there's a lot of resources out there, both online and at your local tackle shops, and it's not that hard to come out here and access these fisheries in a small boat with some simple equipment. So come out here with family and friends and have a good time like we have today. Thanks for joining us, and be safe out there on the water. So we haven't talked a lot about the finer points of fishing tackle. Bear in mind that where you're fishing on the Sound, how deep you're fishing, and how fast you're trolling those baits through the water is probably going to have more of an impact on your success than anything else. But with that being said, let me talk a little bit more about the tackle we're using. You notice that we use downriggers with 8-pound downrigger balls to get our baits deeper and deeper as the sun got higher in the sky, which turned out to be really helpful as we hooked up on some fish late, upwards of 100 feet deep. If you're fishing on a budget and you don't have a lot of money, you don't necessarily need downriggers to access these fish. One thing you can use is lead weight, which will get you down 30, 40, 50 feet deep, which is plenty deep enough to start off with. If you want to go much deeper than that, though, you're going to have to invest in a diver, which is only like $25. It's a lot less expensive than a downrigger, which will cost you anywhere from $150 to $300. So look for these divers in your local tackle shop if you want to fish deep and you don't really want to spend a lot of money on tackle. Now this is probably the most popular thing that people use when trolling for coho salmon, and that is a flasher board with a leader pulling a squid hoochie. There's a lot of different colors of both flasher board and hoochies. I'm not going to get too much into the specifics because these things tend to change even from year to year on what's been hot and what hasn't been so hot for catching these fish. But what is important is these flasher boards have a reflective tape. It's common to all of them. When this thing rotates through the water 360 degrees, as they do, it's going to emit a lot of flash. It's also going to have a lot of vibrations associated with it spinning through the water. The flash is something they key in on, as it looks like another salmon feeding on bait fish, and also the vibrations they pick up on their lateral line. All things that are working for you. And you might notice they all have flash to them and they all roll through the water. So even though some guys will get you into, you need to try this color or this color, the most important components of these boards are built into every single one of them. Same thing with the hoochie. There's a lot of different colors. A lot of people like this iridescent flash inserts that you can put into the hoochie bodies. But to be honest, the look of this bait being pulled behind the flasher is not going to vary too much from hoochie to hoochie, and you can decide with your own experience whether you want to have a specific color that works. Pearl and green and whites are all colors that are pretty commonly used in the Sound. A lot of people use a double hook rig. That's to up your chance of landing the fish. Just remember to pinch both of those barbs. And a lot of people like to tip that front hook with a small piece of herring. Just a small strip that adds a little scent to the bait, and there's that much more to entice the fish into striking. Probably the most important thing of this whole setup is the leader length and the weight. And you might scratch your head and say, well, why is that? Well, with heavier line, the action of this flasher going through the water is going to get translated to the bait a lot more. That's because 40-pound test line is really rigid. I'd go with 30 to 40-pound test line for your leader. Also leader length. Most people use 28 to 36 inches. If you make a leader that's too long, this squid or hoochie is just going to sit back there and not move around. If you bring it up shorter to the flasher board, 2.5 to 3 feet, and you use 30 to 40-pound test line, a lot of that action from the flasher is going to go right back to the bait, and that bait is going to move around. And that's really important a lot of times when you're trying to entice a salmon into striking. So pay attention to your leader length, your leader weight, and I think you're going to catch a lot more fish.
When you're out there fishing, make mental note of what species you catch, if they're hatchery or wild, and the size of the fish you catch. And also what time you start and finish fishing for the day. That way, when you come back to the boat ramp and are interviewed by a creel clerk that works for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, you can provide accurate information for the department to better manage the fisheries for future use.